Jesus. Can we not do that again?
What on earth was that getting arrested? And what was that like? I mean, can you talk about that? We try not to do too much endorsements on here about what's
Yeah, well, I think it's topical. So,
Max, are we happy with Madge saying
sure, if he wants to.
Wait, what did I say? What have I said?
Right, you've lost that.
What?
You've lost that privilege.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Sunday Roast. This time we're back with two wonderful guests, a regular of the show and a new one. Graham, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
yeah, hi, Max. Thanks for inviting me on. I am Graham Smith, CEO of Republic, the anti-monarchy campaign, and one of the 8 who were arrested on the day of the coronation, and also author of a new book called Abolish the Monarchy, Why We Should and How We Will.
Wonderful. We'll get to a lot of interesting questions in just a little bit. Big Madge, can you tell us about yourself for anyone who's new to the show?
They already know. There's no introduction needed. They already know. I've got enough appearances on the show. You know, Big Madge Studios is my channel. Thanks for having me back on again, guys. I really appreciate it.
Great to have you back.
Thanks,
Alex, my wonderful co-host, can you tell us about yourself?
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a YouTuber known as Political X, and I'm a historian and author, and all around try to be a do-gooder. My wonderful co-host Max, can you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you very much. My name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel where I talk about British politics and Brexit in particular. So our main topic for today is the monarchy. Alex, do you have a question for Graham about the monarchy?
I'm hearing that the polls are collapsing, Graham.
Yes, indeed. So we've last week, Savanta poll came out asking the question of which do you prefer, monarchy or an elected head of state? And for the first time that I can remember, the monarchy was under 50% on 48, and the elected head of state was on 34%. So a much narrower gap, and that passing that really important threshold of 50% on the way down. And today, in fact, we've just published a poll commissioned through YouGov, which puts them on 45%. So that's 2 polls asking the same question within a space of about 10 days. And yeah, the polling is pretty damning. The people are simply losing interest and now turning against it. And in fact, all of the age groups under the age of 50 are now below 50%. So it's not just young people, it's all the groups under the age of 50 are now below 50%, and some of those groups there are more Republicans than others. There's none of them that are actually majority over 50% on our side, but it is shifting in our favor.
We're going to have a huge shift, aren't we? We could be back in the EU with a proportional representation and an elected head of state in the next decade of the way things are going. Madge, what are your thoughts on all this? What, are you shocked by these polls? Isn't the monarchy just lovely and rosy and clean and fun?
I don't get to quote this often, but in the words of Nate Diaz,
hey, I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised at all, because honestly, right, you know, like with the Queen, at least I think she had a lot more presence about her, and I feel like people liked her a lot more. She looks like a grandma figure. With Charles, he's just, you know, with that scene with the fountain pen when he's showing someone off.
Oh God, I hate this.
Oh look, it's going everywhere. Hang on. So nobody got it.
Where is that?
Oh look, it's everywhere.
There is bloody thing. What are they doing? Everyone's stinking.
It looked very ugly, and he's never been that popular with the whole situation with his wife Camilla, or whatever she is to him. It's just not good. I think optics is just really bad, and there's not many redeeming qualities of him, to be honest. I think, like, not in a mean way, but like there was a lot of racism allegations.
Well, the palace is said to be furious after Prince Charles was revealed as the royal who asked about Archie's skin colour.
Bro, what are you doing? Like, that's, you know, like, you know, your first concern, especially as a grandparent, should be, is the kid going to be like healthy and stuff? They're going to be okay. Not, oh yeah, what shade are they going to be? Like, oh, dumbass. Like, it just, it don't make sense. Oh, you can censor that one if you want YouTube. I don't care about.
I mean, the Queen was the real deal in most people's eyes, you know, and she had been around for longer than most of us can remember, and you know, she was the monarchy. And now and most people have never seen that transition. And a lot of people are like, hang on a minute, I was okay with it before, but now that I've seen you just walk in and take this job, that doesn't feel right. And he doesn't have that, you know, that sort of, he just seems like a bloke in a suit chancing his arm, and who the hell is he, and I think we've played a part in that to some extent by introducing all these protests, which have become sort of connected to his reign. So, we did some protests when the Queen was around, but almost immediately that he became king, people started protesting. Small protests in the week after she died, and then it started ramping up at the start of last year. And that's a new phenomenon for people to see, very visible yellow protests wherever Charles is going. And that suddenly made, I think, a lot of people go, oh, hang on a minute, this is something we can not like. It's okay to be against it and to protest against it. So, and there might be a reason why they're doing that. So let's find out and engage with this. So, yeah. It's and what's also interesting is that the polling is showing a big jump in the number of don't knows. So the YouGov was 24% don't know as to which one they prefer. Now they've shifted from liking the monarchy to don't know, and that means that they've gone off the monarchy. They're certainly questioning it, and they haven't yet really grasped what the alternative is. So that's the big challenge now, is to really sell the alternative as something which is bigger than just changing the head of state. And which kind of reflects what I think is now the prevailing mood, which is sort of caught up in what you were saying before about everything changing and PR and EU and whatever. But I think it's sort of shifting to a more progressive liberal sort of sentiment in the country. That's what I think is going on. And we saw YouGov poll today that it put the Tories on 20%, but for the under 50s, again, that same bracket, 10%. I mean, that is devastating for the Tories, and it is very. It tells a similar picture of this kind of tectonic shift in the way people are thinking about things.
Did you see that they shut down the Young Conservatives? It's gone.
Really?
True.
They ran out of 50-year-olds to start.
A young-looking 50-year-old, yeah.
There was a guy from the Young Conservatives interviewed. I know we're going a bit off topic here, but he was pretty upset about how the Tories have not done anything about housing. So,
yeah.
Graham, I just wanted to ask you a question. In a similar way to Brexit, is it the case that there's less support for the monarchy, but that doesn't automatically translate into people wanting a president?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of engagement that needs to happen for people to really think about it. And most people don't think about it and don't care. I mean, the most common response I get from people when I just sort of, chat to them casually, whoever I meet, wherever, is, and I tell them what I do, and they're like, yeah, but I don't really care, which is useful for us in the sense because I can persuade them more than people who go, no, I love the Queen. That will change when this becomes a much bigger debate. And we saw this both with Brexit and Scotland. I mean, as I said, we've got over 30% saying that they would prefer an elected head of state. Now, independence in Scotland was around 30% at the time they called the referendum. And it rapidly went up to 50%, dropped back slightly and they lost, but it went up. And Brexit was around 30% for a long time. And then rapidly went up and tipped over 50%. So the debate can make a huge difference. And we're talking about ramping up our campaign and carrying on. I mean, we had a spectacular year last year in terms of income and members, and we've got a bigger team now and all the rest of it. And if we can just shift that polling a little bit closer, and even if we can get neck and neck, then the pressure to actually do something about it is just going to keep building.
It seems inevitable, doesn't it? To be honest, there's too many controversial things happening. Epstein is not going to go away. We will be talking about that. That's not going to go away. I mean, the videos seem to be out there. Everyone, we've got witnesses saying they've seen them, which is shocking. But we'll stick with the polling and everything else. What would you rather have? I'm going to throw this over to Max. Max, because obviously in Ireland there is a president. In Italy, there's a president.
Yeah.
What would you rather have, Max?
Yeah, I think an elected president. One actually elected by the people. And so there are the presidents that are elected by the Senate or by the Parliament or whatever. But I think a directly elected president would be the best. But also I like the idea of a symbolic president, not so much a political one. Like is in the Republic of Ireland, in Ireland. Sorry, is Britain ready for that? Do you think, Graham?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that. But again, it's about. I think that they are, but they don't hear enough of this debate. And this is one of the things we've been saying about in response to these polls is that the media need to have a more honest and frank debate about these issues, and the BBC, particularly the broadcasters, particularly need to start to realise that this is no longer, the 1980s or the 1970s or the 1950s, and they need to, catch up and start changing the way they deal with this issue, and people will engage with it and will change their mind. Now, I've done quite a few live debates where I see within the space of an hour and a half or an hour, people change their mind in our favour. So people do engage with it and do change their mind. And so last year I did a debate at the start of the year, which is in some kind of literary group in North London, about 100 people in the room, mostly retired people. And when we started, they did a vote, and it was about 25 of them were on our side, a few don't knows, and majority on the other side. At the end of the evening, they did a vote, and we had 52 of them on our side. And then about 7 months later, I did Exeter University, where there's about 140 people. And they allow you to, when they do the vote at the start, they also allow you to vote to abstain. So they say there's roughly 50-50-40 split, so 50 for and against and 40 abstaining. And at the end of the evening, there were 93 on our side. So people engage with it, they listen, they change. And part of it is because they kind of get that the monarchy is a tough sell. It doesn't help that the people that are selling it are not particularly, they don't do a great job. They're all these odd sort of loyal commentators that just don't really understand where the country's at.
They can't afford to, don't they?
Sorry?
They can't afford to. It's their income. This is the thing that I always see coming out of it, is the fact that these royal commentators, that's part of their bread and butter, writing autobiographies and everything else.
Yes.
I remember, is it Amy Robach for CNN had the Epstein story 3 years ahead of everyone else.
Yeah, she did an interview. She was really pissed off about it as well, because the royal family killed the story.
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story.
The level of power, and it comes back to what you were saying with the media. There's only 4 big media outlets. The Conservatives stuck in a chair, which through some very dodgy dealing, which was an £800,000 loan from the chair of the BBC loaned Boris Johnson 800 grand, which is insane, and then got the position. And then the other 3 big barons who run about, I think it's somewhere in the region of 70 to 87% of the media. None of them live in the UK, and they don't pay taxes. And then on top of that, they're obviously easily swayed in one direction that suits their purpose.
I mean, I think the press is less of an issue because the press will follow the audience to a large extent. And also, I mean, we sort of got a free press. I mean, it's not free in the sense that it's controlled by a few oligarchs, but I mean, it's free. It should be free in the sense that they can say what they want, but they will eventually follow the audience. So if they smell where this is going, they'll switch at some point. But the BBC is the bigger problem because that's where most people get their news. And even if they get it from newspapers, that's where they get it confirmed, and that's where that's the source that most people trust. And their failure on this issue is, extraordinary. They really just don't get it, that they are being biased and deferential. And I mean, the stuff headline news, the 2 top stories yesterday for most of the day was Charles going into hospital next week was top story, and the next story was Kate being in hospital. And lots of whipping.
Sorry, how did Charles get into hospital so quickly? Is there not like a waiting list?
He's going private.
Private? How is that possible?
Well, I know.
Believe in the NHS?
No, unfortunately. He dodged a massive 600 million tax bill 18 months ago, so he's got plenty of money. So
Isn't it funny though? You brought it. I hadn't twigged this. Those 2 have gone into hospital, right?
Yeah.
Kate and Charlie Boy. But aren't they both the 2 people that it's been claimed that the racist comments were made by?
Yeah, I don't know whether there's any connection, but
I
I don't know whether racism makes you unwell or anything. Yeah, I mean, it's just weird because the thing that Charles has gone into is it's incredibly common. But most guys of that age who have that prostate problem, they're on massively long waiting lists, and they're putting up with all sorts of difficulties and pain and whatever because of that. And so all they're really doing, again, I was talking to a colleague about this earlier, most people don't care about the monarchy. And so when they're in the news all the time, it kind of doesn't help them because it just annoys an awful lot of people. And when they're in the news with this, it's like, well, yeah, okay, we get it. People get ill. Why are you banging on about it like they are more important than us? And why are you telling us that they are just going straight into hospital for something which I'm still on a waiting list for 18 months later? So I think it's really not going to help them. And I don't think there's going to be much sympathy because they, if they were told, okay, he's got cancer and he might not live, then people would be sympathetic. And they're sympathetic in a basic sort of, wish him well kind of thing. But then move on, don't care. Because we all have these problems.
Sorry,
can I ask a question? No, I just wanted to ask a question. There isn't really a rational justification for a monarchy. Like, I'm just trying to think of justifications people present. It's really just something like, well, it's a feeling or tradition or something like that.
It's because they're baked in and they've been there for a long time, and it's the way things have always been. That's the way people see it. It's the way things have always been. Why would we change it? And that's one of the mentality problems we have in this country. It's what could replace them. The idea that having a royal family stopped the spread of fascism in Britain. It's like, no, it didn't. And we outlawed, like, I think it was the brown shirts. Like, we stopped them being able to operate. That's one of the things that stopped it.
Yeah.
The monarch at the time didn't say, you guys knock that off. In fact, the monarch who abdicated actually met Hitler, didn't he?
Yeah.
After he abdicated, he met Adolf. Yeah.
He was a Nazi sympathizer. Yeah.
Yeah. So the argument of the royal family did anything to stop fascism is like doubt.
Well, have you seen Prince Philip at the Nazi funeral at the front?
But I think it's a bit more, but not to defend Prince Philip, but I think there was it wasn't as clear cut as that.
No, because it was his cousins that were married over to Germans who were in high positions in the.
He had family in Greece that married into the Nazis. Yeah, but there was there was a royal who I think was one of Victoria's sons who moved to Germany to become like the Duke of somewhere, and all of that was abolished in 1918. But he stayed in Germany, and there's I think it's the funeral of was it George V or whatever in 1936. You see the old black and white, and there's this one guy with a kind of a German greatcoat and a German helmet, and that's the British royal who's come back for the funeral. It's very odd.
It's a big context marker needed for that one. So yeah, let's make sure that's there.
Yeah. Going back to the point about the rational justification, I think there's a couple of things here, which is that there's a brilliant quote from Tom Paine, which he says that there's a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives the impression of it being right. And I think that an awful lot of people are just in this habit of thinking that it's good and it's part of what makes Britain work. And therefore they kind of do a post justification, and they try and find rational arguments to why it should be there. So the best stab they have is sort of constitutional stuff about stability and independence and impartiality, but none of that stacks up. I mean, it's all nonsense.
They also try and argue the Queen generates a lot of money through people coming to Buckingham Palace and things like that. But it's like, they're not here to see the Queen; they're here to see the palace. If I rock up at Buckingham Palace tomorrow, I try and go on to the areas I'm not meant to, I'm getting arrested. But if you look at some of the other places, the former palaces, I was lucky enough to go to Germany once, and Sicilianov Palace, you can go in there, you pay like €12 or something like that, and it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning, and that's me actually. That building's actually generating income for Germany. Yeah, Palace of Versailles, beautiful from what I've seen in the pictures.
I mean, you don't have to go overseas. I mean, Tower of London is far more popular and far more impressive. And in fact, the opening chapter of my book is actually about. It starts off with tourism, and I talk about the fact that I took my nephews around Buckingham Palace, and had previously a few weeks earlier gone around Tower of London. And Buckingham Palace as a tourist destination is really, really dull because, and there's a guy, you probably heard of him, I can't remember his name, but he does a lot of history YouTube. He has like a history YouTube channel. And he said he doesn't normally do reviews, but not that long ago he took his, or him and his wife went to Buckingham Palace. and he was just raging about how awful it was as a tourist experience, how badly they were treated, how little there is to look at. Because they don't want to tell you all the history of the royals, because it's not something which they necessarily want to share. So all you do is you go around with one of those audio things, and it just sort of lists off how many teacups they have and how many dining rooms they have, and it says this is the dining room and it's used to entertain guests, which seems like a fairly obvious observation. But so yeah, it's dreadful on that score as well. But the tourism thing is complete nonsense. But again, that is something which has emerged over the last 30, 40 years because people are realizing that the old sort of feudal values are sort of disappearing, and so you have to justify it by what money's going in your pocket, and that is not really washing anymore.
I think the whole tough thing's wearing thin as well. Or we like, people who talk to speak well, mog types. I think that kind of love of that kind of character is dying off when people realize they're not actually that smart and they have no idea what they're doing. The only thing is they speak the Queen's English, or I guess it'll be the King's English. That's about it. But, you realize there's not much else there. So I think the love of that character is dying. The only problem I see is I think people in this country, in England, love pantomime. They love the theatre of it. And Parliament is very theatrical because of the royal family, the sceptre thing and whatever other nonsense happens around that. Like the whole idea you need royal assent to pass a law. It's like, it's all formalities because the King's not going to say, I think you're signing that. You get a crisis.
I mean, no one ever sees him do that because he doesn't actually do it in person. So he sort of hands over the power and some people in.
It's an e-signature, an electronic one.
Yeah, but again, I'm not entirely. I mean, I think to some extent people like it, but I get tired of this idea that this idea that Britain no one does pomp and pageantry as well as we do. I mean, it just isn't true. And we were protesting at the state opening of Parliament. Now, if you're outside, A, there's hardly anyone there to watch it, and B, it's just really weird and boring. I mean, you're standing there, there's long stretches of nothing, and then a carriage goes past with a few horses either side. And one of the first carriages is got two footmen with the crown on a cushion in the middle. So the crown itself gets its own carriage, and then there's like some junior royal, and then there's the king, and then there's some other junior royals. And then they just sweep past and go in. And the bit in the inside is just bizarre and, again, not particularly interesting. And it's a very powerful symbol of the state, with us in our place, because it's the king and all the people in their ermine robes, the lords, and you can barely see the politicians who are sat at the back. So it's really not a good look.
It's an obscene display of wealth. Like I remember one of the American commentators I used to watch talking about the Queen's speech, saying, "Oh, this person talking about how we need to tighten our belts is like, look at you with your gold crown and your gold scepter and your gold piano and your gold throne." It's like, okay, buddy, like, let's really, let's really kick, poverty. Let's really push poverty because you need to have all your nice things. It doesn't make sense, like especially when you see the Queen's speech when it's in that context.
Graham, just to follow on from that, do you think that the cost of living has really driven down support for the monarchy?
I think it's certainly been a big factor in the sense that, as it was just said about, this contrast between their wealth and where everybody's at. And I think this is also feeding into the fact that the evidence is that younger people, as they're getting older, are not getting more conservative because we've had now 16 years since the crash of 2008, and since then it's just been cuts and austerity and cost of living crisis with COVID thrown in the middle of it all, and people are struggling to buy homes and they're struggling to make ends meet, and homelessness is going up, and food banks are out of control and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think that is really, really striking. And the problem is that, going back to the point I made earlier, that the Queen is the monarchy, and people would forgive her an awful lot, and they would push all the blame down the line. Now, either it was usually staff or flunkies or whatever, they were at fault for whatever went wrong, or it was one of the other royals. But people were happy to criticize Charles. But now Charles is on the throne; he's the one that can get criticized. It's okay to criticize him. And they're really floundering because they also then want to think, well, okay, we need to be relevant, and so they go out and talk about the environment whilst flying around in private helicopters.
He's been criticised for using private jets, so launching an eco-tourism project in Amsterdam seemed bizarre.
And then William uses big issue sellers as props for his PR. And there's one guy that he's now met 3 times in these PR things saying, oh yeah, this is my mate we met last year. So, well, why is he still selling big issue? And why don't you give him a room in one of your palaces? or a job as a footman or something. He's clearly not your mate. And I think people are really kind of getting slightly tired of their PR nonsense. I don't think it works.
I think their PR is horrible. And, the royal family is that toxic that Harry'd rather spend time in Afghanistan and then leave the royal family because the way they treated his wife. Like, dude's like, Joe, I'll go fight the Taliban. Like, I ain't dealing with you and this nonsense. And like the way they dealt with Meghan Markle was just really bad. And the fact that it was very leaky. For the first time in a long time, it's very leaky. That stuff was getting out. They were briefing against each other, and we could see how ugly it was, and how much the media had the royal family had a stranglehold on the media. I think the mask kind of slipped there really badly, and they're not good at PR, like you said. How are you like with the same homeless guy 3 years in a row? It doesn't make sense. Like, you could change this man's life if he was your friend. If he was your friend, would you not want to help him? And I think people just see them as deeply unlikable. There's no redeeming qualities in a lot of them. In terms of personality-wise, at least from what I read of Princess Diana, people actually liked her. She did change, I think, the stigma around HIV, which is incredible for a member of the royal family to actually do that. Politicians were scared of that, and she did it. She changed the conversation around that. What have the other ones achieved? Nothing.
No, indeed. And this is the problem, is that you do either fit in, and you have to fit in with everything that they expect you to fit in with, or you hit the wall, like well, it's probably not the best choice of phrase, but you hit something with Diana, and then literally, but then Meghan Markle figuratively, and it all goes wrong. And neither of them were prepared to simply fit in. And it's very telling that the two women who are the most engaging and popular royals in the last 30 years are the two women that had to leave.
Yeah, and it's funny as well because of the racism thing. I mean, Piers Morgan. I think you were on a debate with him, weren't you, Piers Morgan?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a right.
Well, on the show, yeah.
Yeah.
It's on Good Morning Britain, or was this?
No, this is Talk
TV.
It's
Talk TV thing, yeah.
It's you and Alex O'Connor that seem to pop up and go on there and smash him a new one. And it's really funny. There's a clip of him actually talking about Meghan going in to a royal. This is Piers Morgan saying this. I think it was a load of clips, and he literally says,
she's mixed race, she's American, she's a divorcee, actress. Those are 4 ticks. No member of the royal family, the senior members, ever thought they would see having to be ticked when it came to Harry's bride. Meghan's marrying into a family which has, to put it mildly, a dodgy track record on race. It's not Meghan Markle's problem, it's their problem.
And then he's out on TV going, like a couple of years later, going, I don't know anything about this racism. Like,
I quoted that line in the book, and I also quoted it at him on Twitter, and he blocked us. But
yes,
what a snowflake.
He doesn't like being reminded of it. But yeah, he said that it was in a documentary in the US, and he said that Meghan is marrying into a family that, let's face it, has a problem with race. And 2 years later, he was quoted saying, "Look, I've met all the royals, and there's not a single racist among them." So
apart from Prince Philip, whose cousins were in the Waffen SS. He was at the front of the funeral march, and he has said, I mean, I don't even want to repeat what he said, but he's insulted the Chinese, the Australian Aborigines, the Scottish, people in Papua New Guinea,
Indians,
and Hungary and Ethiopia. And you're going, right, but he's not a racist with all that evidence. Well, it was Edward as well.
He was
pointing out he was a Nazi sympathizer.
People argue with racism. You have to, you don't know what's inside a person's heart when they say these things, So, maybe he just threw them out there. You don't know what's in his heart.
I mean, they are fairly. They're not particularly bright people, and they also live in these very strange, cut-off worlds. I mean, I talked about lady Susan Hussey, who got into a lot of trouble just after Charles became king, where she was. I forget the woman's name, the woman from this charity, and she kept on saying, "Where are you from? Where are you from?"
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because they just don't understand that you can't do that. But it's very telling that if they meet a white person, the question famously is, "What do you do?" But if it's a non-white person, it's "Where are you from?" Because they just can't compute. And Charles did exactly the same thing in 2018 when he met a woman who I think had Guyana heritage, Anita Sethi, and there's some Commonwealth thing. And she's from Manchester, so he said to her, "Where are you from?" And she said, "Manchester." And he said, "Well, you don't look like it," and laughed and walked on. And that's Charles. So that didn't make the news quite so much because it was, I think, the gap between the two was that the royals were very much centre stage in late 2022, and all of the racism stuff had come up through the Meghan Harry story, and so all of a sudden this story breaks and everyone's on it. But a lot of people's responses was to attack the person who had been.
They said she lied.
offended.
They said she lied, didn't she? And she did all sorts of other stuff. She
Yeah.
made it up, and it was taken out of context. And in the end, I think the person who asked her the questions resigned. The most recent one. Yeah, it is ironic though. We live in a capitalist country, which is meant to be a meritocracy, but then we have people with all these inbuilt advantages who you cannot question, and they're given all the wealth despite getting crappy grades at A level. It's like, okay, like we live in a meritocracy. Then okay, I believe you.
But Rishi Sunak did the same thing. Do you remember he was in the homeless shelter?
What do you have? Do you work in a business? Do you want some fruit? I'm homeless, and I'm actually homeless.
Almost identical to what the royal family did. It makes me wonder if that.
Are you in
He said,
business?
"What do you do for a business?" And he's homeless.
He works in finance.
Just like what the? But it. Do you know what? Even with Brexit, I sometimes look at it and go, do they just want us marrying our cousins? Are they that?
That's a royal
embedded
family
with the
problem.
royal
To be
family?
fair,
Is that what they want?
It wasn't there the Sun that come out and said the Queen backs Brexit or something like that, and the royal family went, no, dog, no, it's not us, but they couldn't say it. That's the thing; they couldn't say it publicly because they couldn't get it into be political. So they got played by the Sun.
I gotta say, you're not gonna like this, Graham. I gotta say, there's a couple of good moments though. Queen coming out with that blue hat and the yellow stars. I mean, that was pretty funny. And I gotta give it to Charles on this one thing. Broken clock is right twice a day. When he came out with the Greek tie, that was pretty funny actually. And then them going, oh no, it's just pure coincidence. It's like, he's Greek ties.
He's worn that tie before,
Yeah.
and his dad was Greek. So to what extent that was coincidence or whatever, it's very hard to know. But what I would say to all these things is that we should not be trying to distill messages from our head of state through reading tea leaves. If he wants to say something, say it, or keep your mouth shut.
He did also mock Liz Truss, but we are paying millions of pounds for this man to make very subtle comments about the elected heads of state. The people who did a lot more to earn their positions. We've got a man who was born into wealth and power making comments about the people we elected. It's a bit weird that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're in Italy. I've just finished a book I've written on Mussolini for A-level students, and he got kicked out by the king.
Yeah.
Well, actually, he had a vote from his Grand Council, and then the king booted him out afterwards and had him arrested. But our king, don't want to call him that, Charlie Boy, didn't do that with Liz Truss. As soon as that happened, you would have thought if he was actually going to use his position, he would have gone, right, general election now, you guys aren't operating correctly. Let's sort the country.
You wouldn't necessarily want. I mean, that would be a departure from the sort of even the sort of republic. I mean, some republics you might be able to do that, but I think that the thing about the Italian king is, of course, yes, he booted out Mussolini, but he put him there in the first place 22 years earlier.
Well, we could debate that. I could debate that with you.
Well,
whether or not he did or didn't. I mean,
and he
Mussolini
then
pretty
sat there
much
on the
flexed his huge muscle.
He sat there on the throne for 22 years whilst Mussolini got on with whatever he was doing. So he could have. He is not an innocent party, and of course there was a reason why the Italians then got rid of the monarchy. So just as the Greeks got rid of it or confirmed the abolition of it when they restored democracy, because their monarchies are just useless. And this is the thing about this notion that they are good for stability and defending against tyranny. They're not. Their number one purpose is to defend themselves against
self-preservation.
Everything else is secondary to
it. This is something that I also teach World War One, and it's really interesting because the German Kaiser, the Russian Tsar, and King George, although we could debate King George's involvement, but they're all cousins. Pretty much all between the three of them kicked off World War One. We can talk about Austria and Serbia as well.
Yeah.
But one family just caused chaos. And a lot of historians will tell you that was just a break. World War One and World War Two were pretty much one and the same thing. It was just a gap in the middle, like a halftime whistle. So it's quite interesting to see that doesn't come up much. But they were clearly involved, and they were all three were sending letters and telegrams between each other, trying to calm the situation down. And you're going, right, so Queen Victoria's offspring went on a mad rampage and lugged the entire population in, and now we've been picking up the pieces ever since.
However you put it in terms of their personal responsibility, it was monarchies that plunged us into conflict, and it was monarchies that were plunging us into conflict for centuries before then, because so often it's about the self-aggrandizement of the monarch and not the interests of the people that lived in those areas. I mean, if you look at the map of places like Prussia, and you understand that kind of weird construction of the Holy Roman Empire and the German states, these were not natural states. They were constructions around a king, and it was all about what was good for them and what was, going to self-aggrandize their particular notion of who they were. And there's this constant conflict. There's a reason why most monarchies are now gone.
There's a really interesting quote from a British officer who went down to the trenches for the first time, I think in the Somme, and he said, "My God, we sent our troops in there. Couldn't believe the sort of devastation." And I sort of think to myself, an interesting analogy with Lord of the Rings and with George R. Martin's Game of Thrones here, where it makes you wonder, if the king had been at the front line and had to be charging with the troops like they used to, it makes you wonder how many of those wars would have actually taken place. Yeah. And you know who the last one was? Would anyone like to hazard a guess who was the last UK monarch to be on the battlefield?
Oh, let's go back a bit. No, I can't remember now.
How old are you, Graham?
I don't really go back to my life.
I would say in the 1500s, maybe.
No, it's more recent than that, I think.
Are you looking?
It was probably. It was probably
wait for you to tell us.
James II, maybe. James II.
Oh, George II.
Ah.
Oh, was it that recent?
Yeah. That recently.
To be fair, they did offer the Kaiser during when Germany were losing World War One. They said to him, "You could go in there and do one last glorious charge with their soldiers." Like, yeah, no, I'm going to Switzerland, lads. See you later. So they did give him. They gave the Kaiser. They said, "Look, man, you can go out there. You can die on your sword. You can die in glorious battle." And it's like, nah.
Well, that's the Game of Thrones and the Lord of the Rings thing. You've got King Theoden, who leads the charge to free, is it Minas Tirith? Yeah, it's Minas Tirith. And then there's also that amazing line from Jon Stark, who said,
"Will your men want to fight for you when they hear you wouldn't fight for them?"
I find that fascinating. But we can then bring in Harry and... Did William go in? No, William didn't go in, did he? Just Harry?
No, just Harry.
Yeah.
Why did William not...
There's a lot of talk about the way they do those things, because, I mean, I've heard plenty of anecdotal evidence that Andrew, yes, he was in harm's way in the Falklands, but he was generally considered a liability and an absolute pain in the neck. And Andrew, Harry was surrounded by a platoon of Gurkhas to make sure he was okay. So, which makes him a very expensive soldier. But the one that I like is Napoleon III, who I think was one of the last monarchs to go into battle in Europe when he got captured. So the Prussians went to the French and said, "We've got your king." So the French declared a republic and said, "No, you haven't." So, which I think is a nice move. So, I'm slightly paraphrasing what happened, but yeah, I think it's a good move.
French are pretty good at that.
Yeah.
I was going to bring up the oil as well, which I thought was quite interesting. All the oil that was being mined or pulled out of the North Sea. Who does that belong to? Is it business? Is it the crown? Is it the people of Britain? And there's a reason I'm bringing it up. I've got a context for another country that's just done the same. I mean, what are people's thoughts? Does that oil belong to the businesses that go and pull it out?
It belongs to the crown, as far as I know.
If it's on British territory, then I believe it belongs to the crown. But I know a lot of minerals do. Because I know the Duchy of Cornwall in Cornwall had a fight with the crown, weirdly, arguing that they should have the claim on minerals within Cornwall.
Graham, just to interrupt for a second, can you explain to people the difference between the state and the crown?
Well, there isn't really much of a difference. So when people talk about the crown, the problem is it's used in different ways. So people talk about the crown in terms of the king, and they talk about the crown in terms of the state. And there's different aspects to that. So you talk about the crown estate, which is the land holdings, and then of course you got the crown prosecution, and you got the crown this, that, and the other, and His Majesty's revenue and customs and all the rest of it. So broadly speaking, the crown in 1689, the Glorious Revolution, which someone said was neither glorious nor a revolution, but it was more of a coup, really. But it was The big difference that made is that it flipped the thing on its head. Whereas Parliament sat at the behest of the king, it flipped it on its head, where Parliament then had control of the crown, and they decided who the monarch was going to be. And it's from then on that we started moving towards a constitutional system. So Parliament, to this day, is in charge of the crown, and the crown is synonymous with the state and with the government. As far as Charles being the crown, or being symbolic of it, he is essentially there to sit in the chair and do what he's told by the Prime Minister. So there's no real distinction, which is why when people talk about crown estate money, going back to the royals, if we get rid of the monarchy, no, it doesn't, because it's state money, and it's all state assets. So again,
but Buckingham Palace belongs to the state technically.
Or Buckingham Palace, definitely, yes, which is why we're spending a huge fortune on fixing it. And on that, the question of who owns what, their rule of thumb is that if there's a question of who's paying for it, then it's ours, and if it's a question of who uses it, it's theirs. That's the way they approach this, because they point blank refuse to let the palace being open up all year round, because they want to maintain that privileged access.
So this ties in very nicely to a little quiz I'm going to throw at you then.
Yep.
As to who owns what.
Yep.
I've just come across Norway having absolutely hit jackpot again. I don't know if you heard about this, but they got phosphate stone that you use for solar panels, and it's doubled the world supply. So they've gone from massive oil producers into now the producer of solar panels. It's like, wow, talk about a country like totally landing on its feet.
Yeah.
But when it came to giving out the contracts to industry to go and get all the oil out, they said that oil, because it's on the seabed, belongs to the people. So they said in the contracts, 50% of the money has to go to the state, or the state involvement is at 50%. So you're going, and that's then built this huge sovereign wealth fund that they've got, which helped them out of COVID. I think it's like 1.4 trillion at the moment. So that's why I sort of threw the question out there, because it's like chalk and cheese in terms of who's dealing with what. We do it, and I think is it 13% max? 17% goes back to the UK government from the oil that we've just given out to.
I think so.
It's something.
But I'm not an expert in the field, but I understand that it is crown property, i.e., state property. But and I believe I'm right in saying that before the 80s we did have control over it. But from memory, and I could be completely wrong on this, the Thatcher major governments essentially just sort of privatized it out and sold it off, and let the oil.
It'd be with the licenses, wouldn't it? The companies buying the licenses, they would be able to. I think that's how it would work.
But I think I don't think it's changed the fact that it's still sitting on crown land. So I think those licenses can be negotiated back out, and it's a political decision that we didn't do what Norway did. But could have done.
Well, it was Sunak that gave out more licenses, didn't he? So yeah, it would be up to the crown. So that would make sense.
It'd be well, the crown estate owns the seabed. That's part of their.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why they got a huge pay rise, because they put all these. They're starting to put all these wind farms. So Crown Estate's generating income from that.
Yeah,
that's why they're able to give themselves a pay rise. Whilst everyone.
I know. I mean, that was outrageous. They're getting an extra. I mean, the money doesn't come from the Crown Estate; it's just pegged to it since 2011. So, and it's an absolutely stupid system. I mean, trying to explain this to people, they could have also just said, "Well, we're going to peg it to the profits of McDonald's or IKEA." For all the sense it makes, because the money is not coming from the Crown Estate; it comes from the government when they fund the government, fund the monarchy, and that grant, which is only part of the funding of the monarchy, is jumping from 80 something to 120, 130 million pounds over the next couple of years. So a massive increase, and they're already spending more than they're getting each year because they're eating into the surplus. So and that's only happening not because they've budgeted and decided they need to do that, but it's happening because the profits of the Crown Estate are going up. So it's absolutely no rhyme or reason why that money should go to them and not to other people.
Probably all the security they need for Andrew at the moment. Where all the money's going. We've got to ask you actually, Graham.
Yeah.
What on earth was that getting arrested, and what was that like? I mean, can you talk about that? I don't know if it's completed. Can you talk about what's happened afterwards as well? Because I believe you took the police to court. I couldn't ascertain whether or not that had been completed or not.
No, it hasn't happened yet. So it does take a bit of time. So we're still waiting for work to go through the system. But yeah, we are suing them. Basically, when we had 4 months of discussions with the Met Police, from January through to the coronation. 2 meetings with their superintendent, who was the civil commander in charge of substantial part of the policing on that day. Lots of conversations with their liaison officers. And then when we got there, it was a very hostile, frosty reception. And then 7 o'clock in the morning, we were arrested. That was 6 of us, 5 staff and 1 of our volunteers arrested. And then 3 hours later, 2 of our volunteers were arrested because they happened to be standing next to a bag that had 2 different people, 2 different bags. We'd equipped these little teams of people to protest along the route, and they had a bag with a megaphone in it. The megaphone wasn't being used because they were worried because of the atmosphere from the police. But someone just said, "Is that yours?" They said, "Well, yeah, I guess," and they were arrested. So 8 of us all together, and we were held for right up until 10 o'clock was, I think, the earliest person to be let out, and then some of them were still in sort of 1, 2 in the morning. So
what was the treatment you got from the police? Were they sympathetic, or did they say, "Look, we're just doing our job," or was it aggressive?
Police on the ground were aggressive, hostile, grossly unprofessional, and quite frankly, the arresting officer should be sacked, because he just wasn't interested in talking. He had no legal grounds, in my view, to stop us in the first place or to search us or anything else. But he did, and then they must have been, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the footage, but there must have been like 50 police officers on that road, and there were only 5 of us. So yeah, that was extraordinary. The police officers in the police station, I mean, they got to be a little bit careful what they say, because there's microphones everywhere. But they were fairly clear, as best as they could be, that they thought their time was being wasted and we shouldn't be there. And one of them said to me at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he said, "Look, if it makes you feel any better, you're on the news all over the world, so."
Yeah, if anything, it had the opposite effect, didn't it? Because it's the Streisand effect that they amplified your message.
Well, indeed, and it did make me feel better, but I mean, not only by a margin, but it's I mean, it's been transformational, because I mean, back sort of mid 2022, when we're doing the Jubilee campaign, I was the only member of staff at the time. We'd had other staff in the past, but they sort of left in 2019. COVID came along, whatever, and 2020, our income was just over £100,000. Got to 2022, it was already growing, so 176, 2021, 100. It was doing quite well in 2022, but that's the kind of ballpark we were talking about. In September 2022, after the Queen died, we had an income of £70,000 that month alone, and our income jumped to 286,000. Last year, 2023, we've just got the figures in, our annual income was 595,000. So it's more than doubled. It's gone up by 6-fold since 2020, and we now have 4 full-time staff, part-time staff. We're thinking about additional staff. We've got over £200,000 in the bank, and our presence is far, our profile is far greater, and the whole protest thing has become part of the public consciousness. I mean, someone just happened to spot on Instagram a cartoon that someone had done, and it was the Lion King scene where the what's the guy? Is it Simba or whatever? I think it's at the end when he's grown up and he's standing proud on top of the rock, and all these other animals are sort of. There's one little animal down the bottom with a yellow "Not My King" sign, and that is. It's a brilliant cartoon, but that kind of says something about how far this has kind of reached people, and I think it's it's become a shorthand for discussions about protests and arrests and whatever. So Liberty and Amnesty just launched a petition with a video where they're going around talking to people, vox popping, asking them about things. It's quite a funny video, and the first thing they're doing is saying to people, they've got the luggage straps that we had, and saying, "Don't you think it's right that people should be it should be possible to arrest people if they're carrying luggage straps?" And everybody's like, "Well, no, nonsense. No, how can it possibly be right?" So that is a direct reference to our arrest. So it completely transformed everything, and it certainly, I think, has had some impact on the debate and on the polling.
It's absolutely maddening. I mean, there were people being arrested for holding blank pieces of paper.
Yeah, I mean, that was Paul
so you're
Pound
just going, how's this different to North Korea or China?
Yeah, indeed. Where they do exactly the same thing in Russia, where they've had blank paper and they get arrested.
Молодец.
I was holding up a blank sign. Why are you asking for my details?
You said you're going to write stuff on it that may offend people.
I said I was going to write "Not my
king"
king" on a sign, and you asked for my details.
It may offend someone.
Who's that going to offend?
I don't know. Someone may
Not
be
my
offended by
king.
it.
Someone might be offended.
And, you know, there was the Animal Rising people who had said, well, we're not going to protest on that day. We're going to have a protest workshop 5 miles down the road. And the police turn up and round them up and arrest them.
I've twigged that. Bring up protesting in general. We talk about stop oil. I've twigged that if Martin Luther King did the exact same things. Exactly the same. I can't find any evidence to show what he would have done if there was an ambulance. He probably would have told everyone to get out of the way. But apart from that, he was marching, he was blocking streets. He blocked it all the way out the city of Birmingham in Alabama.
I've been told, I don't know, but I've been told
the entire motorway.
Yeah,
and you're going, right, so you guys are saying that you would have arrested Dr. King.
Yeah, I've been told that despite the headlines, that Just Stop Oil do let ambulances through, but I mean, and they're not there for very long either. So it's all a lot of fire from the government. But you know, in London,
but roads are blocked off whenever
all sorts of things. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are all like every week there's some sort of event where the roads are blocked off.
Sports events, especially, they block off roads.
We went down to the state opening of Parliament, as I said, to protest there. And it was quite difficult to get there because the police had blocked all the streets. And I tweeted saying, "Is someone going to arrest the police for blocking all the streets?" I mean, it's just, it's just ludicrous.
Maybe somebody's pushing through with their, their van because they're upset with the police blocking the street. No,
that's not good.
What about the young kid calling out Andrew?
Yeah,
being arrested in Scotland. I mean, the police. It's quite interesting when you start looking at.
Was that the guy carrying eggs who was arrested for carrying eggs?
The young kid. Young kid.
The guy in Scotland shouted something about him, Andrew being a nonce, because Andrew was there when they were bringing the coffin down the Royal Mile, and they arrested him rather than arresting Andrew.
But what was he arrested for?
Causing public disturbance.
There's some public disturbance law in Scotland that, it's quite broad. You know, basically, if you upset people, you can get arrested.
I mean, Andrew's upsetting him by
existing. Well, indeed. Yeah.
But of course, that's fine. I mean, you look at the entire. I mean, the stuff with the police. We could go back. I mean, when you look at how they've not investigated Andrew, and I've listened to the former police commissioner of the Met explaining to Nick Ferrari what the conditions are to investigate. The person's got to be alive. The victim's got to be around. It's got to take place in the country. And you're going, well, all of that's happened. Maxwell's alive. I mean, the victim's alive. It happened in the UK. But Channel 4 provided 14 victims, names of victims to the Met Police.
Yeah.
It's on camera. And the Met have gone, no, there's nothing to find here. Then you've got this whole thing with the tapes now coming out. And you're going, all the stuff that came out in January. Yeah. They still don't want to investigate. And it makes you I promise I'll let you in, Graham. I can see what I'm in. It then makes you go, do you remember there was an ex-SAS guy who was claiming he was on mission in Paris at the time of Diana's killing? I think his name was it was N. That was the only name that we got. But the police said they investigated and they found nothing. But we've never had those forms released.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, we've also got the Diana letter from the butler, which has been disputed.
Right from the inquest's first day, I thought, what if this woman's name had been Diana Smith, and she'd written in a note which had been subsequently unveiled, my husband Charles Smith wants me to die in a car accident. And subsequently she did. In any other family or in any other country, surely Charles Smith would have been called to the witness stand at the inquest into his wife's death.
Yeah, would have been investigated, certainly. And I think this is the thing, that they just don't want to know. And I mean, it's odd that they said that it has to happen in the UK, because it doesn't have to happen in the UK. UK law, if it's a sexual offence, allows you to prosecute it even if it's happened overseas.
Sex trafficking, yeah.
We, when those documents came out a couple of weeks ago, all these court documents were released, I went to the Met Police website and I reported Andrew to the police, saying there is clear evidence. You know, there's no reason why you shouldn't do this. And it got picked up by the media, and the Met Police said, well, we're not going to look into it. Now, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, I forget, this story came out that there was a letter released to the Sunday Times showing that Charles looked like he was exchanging or offering honours, knighthoods, in exchange for donations to his charity, a charity which then spent money on doing up his own home. And so I reported Charles and Michael Fawcett to the police, and the police just dragged their feet for 2 years and then said nothing to see here. Now, they did not interview Charles either as a witness or a suspect. They just didn't want to know. They weren't going to go down that road. 2015, there was a report in the papers that someone in Windsor had witnessed Prince Andrew drive up to the big gates in Great Windsor Park, which are supposed to, they've got a sensor on them which are supposed to open for him. They didn't open, so he rammed them with his vehicle, causing £80,000 worth of damage. They're not his gates, so it's criminal damage. I reported them to the police, and they just said, we don't investigate accidents where there's no harm to life or limb or whatever. So it's not an accident; it's criminal damage. So they just don't want to know. And last week, we went up to Sandringham, and we turned up there on Friday with a box and sort of files of all of the Epstein documents. Turned up to the gate, did a big banner across the gate saying, Charles, why are you hiding? Took a photo and whatever and tweeted it. And then there's a passage there about Prince Andrew taking part in orgies with underage girls. So I read that passage out through a megaphone through the gate of Sandringham. And we were done in about 5 minutes, got back to the car, and then the police turned up and say, well, who are you? What are you doing? It's like, well, if you want to find the guy that you should be interviewing, no, he's behind the gates. Those are the people you should be interviewing, not us. It's madness.
I've been attacked 3 times in London. Every time it's taken 30 minutes to get the police out. But it's not even that they have police security. They've got a military barracks right next door.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing for them and everyone else can go sod themselves.
And it's not just security that you would expect for a head of state. Because I know Norman Baker, the former Lib Dem MP, has written about this, and he's a Republican, and he's written a book about the monarchy and whatever, and he's talked about the security quite a lot because it is used by the royals as a status symbol. So the police, which is to their credit, they do proper assessments of risk, and privately they say, well, there's no reason to give security protection to Andrew or to his daughters, and yet they get it all because that's a status symbol for them. They feel diminished if they don't have police all around them and cars taking them everywhere. And I just happened to be in Oxford Circus just before Christmas, and suddenly the police bike came along with the whistle going, and they closed the whole of Oxford Circus so that they could then whisk Princess Anne around in a small convoy of 3 or 4 cars to take her home from wherever she was.
That's a lot of witnesses at Pizza Express then. He's got a lot of witnesses to say he was at Pizza Express on that day and that he never sweats. They never seen him sweat, There's a lot of people who corroborate the story, but like...
they've lost the files of where they all were. So.
Yeah, can't be a crime if it's never investigated. The Met Police dragged their feet over Partygate as well, didn't they? They said there's nothing to investigate here. And then as soon as Sue Gray got involved, they were like, "Oh, all right, then we'll do something."
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me because it's just the scandal of it all.
And if you look at other countries, there's lots to say, lots to criticize the United States for, but the FBI will investigate the president and former presidents. There was clearly investigations going on into Nixon, and he quit. And now there are investigations going on in Trump. So, you just don't get that same level of protection in places where people expect you to be accountable.
I'm slightly aware of the time. Yeah. I've got just a couple of quick questions. Stephen Fry loves the monarchy.
Yeah.
He's intelligent. What's that about? Have you encountered him? Like, I don't understand. He seems like an intellectual, and he seems to love the monarchy. Does he want a lordship?
Yeah, I don't want to be rude about Stephen Fry. I like him to an extent, but I think seems like an intellectual is part of the key there. I think he's got this sort of persona that has come out of his QI role, but he talks a lot of nonsense when it comes to the monarchy. And there's I don't know whether you know James Rubin, who does the Rubin Report in the States, and he's kind of conservative commentator, and there's an interview with him where Stephen Fry is trying to justify the monarchy in
countries that have kings and queens, which are rationally stupid, weird ideas are empirically freer and more socially just than countries that don't. Consider that. Look at the world now. Look at social justice, happiness, freedom and equality in the world, and you're thinking Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Benelux countries, and Britain, which does have very high levels of social justice, and Holland. And these countries have kings and queens.
And talking about things like, look at these other countries which are progressive and stable, like Norway and Denmark. They're all monarchies. Well, that's not true. If you actually look at the data, you see that there's no connection between having a monarchy and being stable and so on. And then he talks about, how there's this distinction between the head of state and the prime minister, and the prime minister has to bow to the head of state. I mean, it's just nonsense. And the thing is, he is again, Roy Hattersley, the former Labour deputy leader years ago, said that one of the problems with the monarchy is it makes intelligent people say ridiculous things. And this is part of the problem, is that, Stephen Fry is a probably intelligent bloke, but he is a monarchist, and that comes first, and then he has to then find justification for it. Because
he's got to work back from his conclusion. He's got to work back from his conclusion, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes no sense.
And he doesn't want to cut himself off from that world. He doesn't want to lose the invites to the palace, and he wants to be able to sit down with Charles and chat to him about whatever they chat about. And so he justifies it in whatever way he thinks sounds reasonable and rational.
So either it's owned by the state or it's owned by the Crown Estate. And so I'm going to throw it to everyone in the group, see if you can think of whether it's owned by the Crown Estate or the public. First one, British Museum. Max, is it owned by the Crown Estate or is it public?
British Museum, public.
Graham?
I would have thought it was public. I mean, it's certainly funded by us.
Madge?
I'll go Crown Estate, just in case.
Gotta be different. It's publicly owned.
Hey.
Okay.
Hey. We've mentioned the seabed, and that's run by the Crown Estate. What about the Royal Botanic Gardens? Is that Crown or is that State? Graham?
I honestly don't know. My guess is it's State, but yeah.
Madge?
Sure.
I'll go Crown Estate. This one's a slam dunk. It has to be.
Max?
I would imagine everything with royal attached to it is Crown Estate.
It's publicly owned.
Boo this man. Can we just... No, these are trick questions. Boo this man.
Regent Street, Crown Estate or publicly owned? Madge?
Oh, I'm going to publicly owned. It's going to be the estate, isn't it? Publicly owned is my answer.
Graham?
Crown Estate.
Max?
Oh, Jesus.
I think Crown Estate.
It's Crown Estate still. Yeah.
But you can buy it on Monopoly. It doesn't make sense. That's nonsense. You can buy it on Monopoly. How could the Crown own it if I can buy all three?
Okay. Last three. Gold mines. Max?
Crown Estate.
Graham?
That depends on where it is in the UK, but usually the Crown itself, but as opposed to the Crown Estate. But in Cornwall, I think the Duchy claims it.
Madge?
Crown Estate.
Graham's correct. Well done.
You didn't give us that option. This doesn't make sense. Man, it's terrible.
Last two. Devil's Arse. Pete Cavan.
Sorry, I thought you were talking about Nigel Farage. Sorry, go on ahead.
Madge, it's a cabin.
I'll go
Devil's Arse. Is it
owned by the public? It's no way the Royals. Yeah, it's got to be public.
Graham,
what is it? Sorry, I don't.
It's a cave.
Oh, I don't know. I assume that means no. I assume then Duchy, but
Max.
I imagine it's like the seabed, so I'd go with Crown Estate.
Jesus.
Correct. The Crown does own a place called the Devil's Arse. And the final question: dolphins in and around UK waters. Dolphins. Is it owned by the Crown or is it owned by? Well, I guess by no one. You couldn't really have the state saying I owned it. Well, maybe you could make up whatever you want, don't you? In your these days. Madge.
I want to say Aquaman. I'm going Aquaman. All right.
The real king of the sea. Aquaman.
He is. He has a trident. He has a crown. It's Aquaman.
Would you prefer the trident to the sword and the stone?
I think a sword is more practical. But if I was going to be a king, I'd have a trident. Yeah, it'd have to be
King of the Sea. Okay, Graham.
Well, I think the Crown has some weird claim to sea life, but I'm fairly certain I'm right in saying the Duchy claims it in off Duchy waters. But that also might be when it comes on shore, because there was an argument about a dead whale on the beach in Cornwall, and they suggested it was actually the property of I think the National Trust or whoever that owned the beach.
Max, Crown or
I think this is a
one,
trick.
I guess,
I think this is a trick
Aquaman.
question. I think it's a trick question. Nobody.
It's the Crown. Whales, sturgeon, not the politician, and dolphins. Anywhere within 3 miles of UK waters.
Probably during the time of when whale oil was used. I imagine there's some connection there.
1324 is when the law came into act.
All I'm saying is Aquaman wears a crown, so technically I'm not wrong. I'm getting one. I'm taking it. Aquaman wears a crown, right? So I think I'm good.
On that note, bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Be sure to tune in next week for another exciting story from the files of Police Squad.
Jesus. Can we not do that again? That just the levels of ignorance on show from me were tremendous. How can they own Regent Street? It's a monopoly. I'm not having that. I have to contact Hasbro.